Good evening. This is podcast number 2. Um, I know we were discussing the mystery religions of Babylon in the first podcast, but this one here we're going to break away from that. We'll pick that up in the third one. This is pretty important information I wanted to bring to your attention in light of all the UN arms treaty bill that's being circulated, and the vast military presence within our borders, the disregard for posse comitatus, the FEMA detention centers for re-education, Agenda 21 implementations that we're suffering under from those things. Sustainability. People are losing their property rights and all the rest of that. We'll get more into Agenda 21 in a later podcast. Also, with the economic problems that we're having, everything that we're kind of under right now in this country and throughout the world has been pre-planned, and our world leaders are basically following a script that was written out for them many years ago, and I want to kind of discuss that with you. There was a book published on this report, which is entitled The Iron Mountain Report, and it was put out by, well, the information was leaked to a individual who had a book published, and the individual that published the book was Leonard C. Lewin, and it was printed by Dow Press in 1967. And the New York Library of Congress catalog number for that would be 67-27553, and of course that's printed in the United States. But as far as the report goes, I'll give you a brief summary of the report, and then we'll kind of get into the report itself. And it'll fill in a lot of blanks for you folks, and it's very important you know this information, so you're not misled with these buzzwords that are making everything seem warm and fuzzy when they're actually being used against you. But anyway, in 1961, under the Kennedy administration, he ordered a top-secret study to determine what problems the United States would face if the world moved away from an era of war to a golden age of peace. Now that sounds real good on the surface, that's what we all want, but that's not what we're going to get. Okay, at least at first it might seem peaceful, but that'll quickly turn if this thing pans out the way that they are planning it. In other words, it'll bring America into the New World Order. This is their plan. By 1963, the selection of the specialists had been made. This study group consisted of 15 experts, various academic disciplines, who were selected for their expertise in these various fields. The first and last meetings were in an underground nuclear survival retreat called Iron Mountain, and that's why the name of the report contains that name. In that same year, this top secret study was called, in 1961, the Department of State. They put out a publication, and its number is 7277, and it's called The Freedom from War, the United States Program for a General and Complete Disarmament and a Peaceful World. This publication describes a 3-step program to disarm the American military, shut down bases, and have one military under the United Nations. Okay, and we see this happening, all over the place. This is the plan. Okay, this military would be the worldwide police force to be used as peacekeepers throughout the world, and we see that going on all over under the guise of the war on terror. It's to increase the police forces of the UN and to crack down domestically here at home, and devising these internal police forces, and that's what Homeland Security's originally being put in place for. The goon squads, basically, the Stasi, the secret police, whatever you want to call them. It's based off the German model, along with all the other past dictators, all rolled up into one. So we've got a heap of tyranny coming at us if we don't wake up, which is going to be far worse than anything that's ever transpired in human history. And anyway, this plan would include all weapons of mass destruction be eliminated, with the exception of those required for the United Nations Peace Force, of course. In order to keep the peace, all states will reaffirm their obligations under the UN Charter to refrain from the threat of any use or any type of armed force. To support the UN Charter, the average citizen will need to be disarmed as well, so they cannot defend them against these peacekeepers. You don't have to watch, much news to see this going on, folks. It's going on. You can, roll with these punches and understand this and get involved, or you can disregard it and continue to watch American Idol and essentially go back to sleep until you hear that knock at your front door, if they even bother to have that courtesy and drag you from your home, and under sustainable development and relocation, which is being implemented, whether you want to admit it or not, under Agenda 21. But we'll get into that later. These forces, they're being oppressive. It's being incremental. It's happening slowly. It's the whole boil the frog scenario. So understand that. And to quote Sarah Brady, she's the chairman of Handgun Control Inc. And this is her quote: "Our task of creating a socialist America can only succeed when those who would resist us have been totally disarmed." That's a pretty bold statement, I must say. I almost want to point out an interesting thing that happened in the mid-60s. The protests against the war in Vietnam, the protest against nuclear arms, and the protest for arms reduction. Most of these protests were done by college students, many who graduated and became the doctors, lawyers, people in politics, and probably even the president. In '63, the same year of the selections of the specialists for this top secret study, President Kennedy made an astounding statement as well. And on November 13th, while speaking at Columbus University, this is what President Kennedy had to say. And I quote: "The high office of the President of the United States of America has been used to foment a plot to destroy Americans' freedom, and and before I leave office, I must inform the citizens of their plight." And then, of course, 10 days later, he was killed. The study was completed in 1966. President Johnson gave the order that the report was never to be released due to the nature of the conclusions reached. The purpose of the report was to see what it would take to bring the United States into a new world order. The experts decided that the American people were not intelligent enough to understand what Big Brother had decided for them and what Big Brother would need to do to accomplish what was decided for them. So if the truth came out too soon, the people would rise up to try to stop it. So that's the reason for all of the secrecy of the executive orders, which is basically just usurping the Constitution. It's getting around Congress. It's claiming dictatorial power, the executive power, and totally disregarding the other branches of government, which is our republic. And the way that we do things. Now, we're a republic, but we are governed by democratic standards, so don't confuse the two. Also worthy of note, President Johnson was a Freemason as well. So he's plugged all the rest of them, and we're not in it. We're just the recipients of their receivership, to the UN. Let's see. Okay, one man involved in the study elected or released to the public. He didn't reveal his name, but he was part of the study group. His name was, he used the name John Doe, and he did it with great risk to himself. And he believed the American people were smart enough to decide for themselves, if they wanted to lose their freedom to a golden age of peace. And after he released the information, the establishment quickly renounced it, saying it was a hoax. There's many copies of this, not many copies. I couldn't find one myself to save my life. I've been looking everywhere I possibly can, so it no longer exists. It's probably been destroyed by intelligence means to cover this up, because this is very sinister, and totally outlines our entire life. This is the blueprint for our slavery. Okay, there's very interesting terms in the report, repeated throughout the report. Some of them include general condition of peace, functions of war, changing of societal structure, problems of peace, transition of world peace, replacing functions of war, saving the species, namely man, disarmament transition, social control, selective population control, gross population control, and loss of national sovereignty. Okay, they can't do all the things that they're wanting to do and are doing if we're free people. So they have to raise our, lower our standard of living to create that balance for the common good. So the individual rights are going out the window, because the common good, the community laws are going to supersede the individual rights. The stated purpose of the report, and this is taken from the first paragraph of the cover letter of it, is to consider the problems involved in a contingency of a transition to a general condition of peace, and to recommend procedures for dealing with this contingency. This is what they quote. We will do our best to capture the basic message in this report. This 34-page report basically deals with the functions of war and how to replace those functions with other options so there can be a peace and the species, man, can survive. Okay. Now, also the introduction of this report shows some interesting observations this group came up with during their 2.5-year study. If there came a condition of world peace, it would change the social structure of all the nations of the world. There is nothing that has happened to compare with the change that would occur in such an instance. They point out that there would be consequences to peace, not just to the economy, but every aspect of life would also be touched. It would touch the political, sociological, cultural, ecological aspects. The reason they include these aspects in their study is that the world, at that time, was totally unprepared to cover all the demands that would come in to these areas in such a situation of peace. They conclude that at the end of the report, they give their recommendations for what they believe to be a practical and necessary course of action. These 15 experts, they set you straight in the first section that they're, doing to be totally objective to their study. They make a continuous self-conscious effort to keep the values of good and bad. They admit, that it's not easy. They want to keep those moral values out of it altogether and just basically compile raw data, as a computer would. So it takes the human equation out of the human question for our future. They admit that it's not easy, but as far as they could tell, it had never been done before. The previous studies for peace had taken certain things into consideration. The importance of human life, the superiority of democratic institutions, the greatest good for the greatest number, the dignity of the individual, the desirability of maximum health or longevity. These experts did not. They totally did not use anything
to the moral standard that we as human beings adhere to. Okay, um, they instead they attempted to apply the standards of physical science and go on to quote Whitehead. This is what he says. They ignore all judgments of value. For instance, all aesthetics and moral judgments, like I previously said. In other words, the idea of human rights and the value of human life are not taken into consideration in putting together this report. They took their assignment and decided how they will take care of all these problems without considering the people involved. In this report, human beings are being brought down to the level of herds or animals. And Section 4 of it is quite interesting as well. War and Peace as Social Systems, where they point out that wars are not caused because of international conflicts of interest. They further go on to comment that war making active or contemplated is a matter of life and death on the greatest scale, subject to social control. And in the same section, they comment that the threats against natural interest are created or accelerated to meet the changing needs of the war system. And it's nuts. So they're basically using war for human waste to keep the population levels down. Okay, these things, just like they would write a Hollywood script or the scripting for a soap opera. It's a continuing story, folks. They're creating a reality for us, and they have studied for a long time about behavioral patterns. They know how humans operate. They know everything about us, and they use that against us to manipulate us in every imaginable way. So you need to understand this. What you see on TV, hear on the radio, just about every bit of it is propaganda, and to be sure, you've got to look into it. Just don't blindly believe anything anymore. Because we've been lied to for so long, we don't know what's true and what's false anymore. So we've got to explore every avenue to find out who our friends are, who our enemies are, and those kinds of things. We've got to start taking sides and get something going to stand together to do something about this. Okay. We got. I'm going to go into a section called the function of war and the substitutes for war. Okay, in the event of peace, they go into the detail where they cover the economic, political, sociological, ecological, cultural, and scientific. These areas are all affected by the functions of war. So they'll have to find substitutes for these functions of war in order to have peace. Okay, there's an article you can read called Silent Weapons for a Quiet War, and a lot of that's being used against us, because people aren't aware of it. So it's a psychological weapon. But anyway, on the economic side, one of the functions of war is that it uses organized violence to defend or advance national interest. Okay, and they believe it's necessary for a military establishment to, quote, create a need for its unique powers, end quote. Another major function of war is that it produces waste. Okay, and this waste is meant to control surpluses. It also produces jobs and industrial advancement. War basically stimulates the economy. That's stated in paragraph 8 of the book that I had mentioned at the beginning of this clip. It is and has been the essential economic stabilizer of modern society, and in my opinion, past society as well. In Section 6, they come up with options that can replace war. They have 2 criteria, and they must be wasteful and must operate outside the normal supply and demand system. They make a list of social welfare programs such as health and housing, but they comment that there's a weakness in changing the money from the military spending to social welfare, unless it was run like the military, subject to arbitrary control. This control would come in the form of building public housing, medical centers, etc. That can be accelerated or stopped depending on what it would take to create a stable economy. Another option would be a series of giant space research programs, which was pretty much what the space age race was about. And I have documentation from GE and other space research firms that prove, and to me, document-wise, that the space race of the 60s was pretty much a hoax. That was the big money pit for sucking money from the peoples of the different countries to put into these programs that I'm now telling you about, under the disguise of space research. Because this book that I have, this documentation, pretty much lays out that we've already been to the moon in 1958, and that they had formed a joint effort with the Russians, and that the Cold War was also a hoax put in place to suck money from the economies of both countries to fund this joint effort space program, and that they had been to the moon already previous, because in this book it describes the lunar atmosphere and the moisture on the planet, the different gravitational effects, and a whole bunch of other stuff, but we'll get into that another time as well. I've got a lot of documentation on stuff. I've got a lot of information on stuff I've been researching and studying for so long, and it's just, even if nobody watches these podcasts, it makes me feel better, because I feel like I'm passing on something of value to other people that may be able to use this information in a bigger platform than what I'm using. But in any case, onto the of this report. Another war in the political sense is that war is virtually synonymous with nationhood. War has been essential for nations to exist independently, so with peace, nations will have to lose their national sovereignty. Okay, that make sense to you? Okay, so a substitute for the function of war politically would have to come up with something that would be compatible with no national sovereignty. Nations can still exist in the administrative sense, but there would have to be institutions such as a world court or United Nations that has the real authority. Okay, and we have those places, those institutions in place now, working behind the scenes. Another thing to be considered is, that they have been working for a long time to generate a type of space enemy, and they acknowledge that, and this is their quote: "Most ambitious and unrealistic space project cannot itself generate a believable eternal menace," and that's from paragraph 7 of the report in the book, put out by Leonard Lewin. Even the flying saucer instances were not encouraging enough to be used to unite mankind against the danger of destruction by creatures from other planets. An effective substitute for war would require alternate enemies, and that's from paragraph 7. They go on to say that a gross pollution of the environment could eventually replace the mass destruction by nuclear weapons as a threat to the survival of the species, meaning, us humans. In paragraph 8, they go on to say that, quote, "Poisoning of the air and the principal sources of food and water supply is already well advanced. This at first glance would seem to be promising," but they go on to say, "By present indications, it will be a generation to a generation and a half before environmental pollution, however severe, will be sufficiently menacing on a global scale." So, in other words, pollution generation to generation and a half is accomplished, is the desired goal. They go on to explain that the rate of population could be increased selectively, controlled breeding, if there's a modifying of existing programs that deter the the population, it could speed up the process to make the solution credible sooner, and that's why we see an acceleration of the global warming, climate change propaganda being put out by Al Gore and all his little cronies that are part of the climate change board out of the UN. You know, it's just creating this environmental menace. You know, they're going to create whatever they have to bring us into the New World Order and give up all of sovereignty and all of our rights. Let's see, and then paragraph 10 in this report, according to the book, it stresses the fact that even though some of the alternate enemies mentioned may seem unlikely, they are sure that one must be found. It must be of credible quality and magnitude, and this is their quote, credible quality and magnitude if a transition to peace is ever to come without social disintegration. Now, to put that into layman's terms, there must be some type of a disaster found that will unite the nations under one roof. Okay, New World Order. The sociological side of it, this function of war, in the author's report's opinion, is an insult to human intelligence. Okay, and to mine too, and it should be yours. They go on to state in the third paragraph of this report that the fact that the military service has a patriotic priority to society, in society, this is an idea that needs to be maintained for its own sake. It could be used as a, quote, control device over the hostile, nihilistic, and potential unsettling elements of society in transition. Basically meaning they don't have to use the term people. The draft can be again defended, and quite convincingly, as a military necessity. They go on in the fourth paragraph to say that, quote, the arm is defended and quite convincingly as a in every civilization has provided states of haven for the unemployable. They go on to comment this function of war must, quote, involve a real risk of personal destruction, end quote. If the substitute doesn't provide a believable life and death threat, it will not serve the, quote, socially organizing function of war. And that's from paragraph 12. All right. In the substitution for the function of war, there's also two other critical classifications. In order for there to be a stable society and a world peace, the following criteria would be needed. An effective substitute for military institutions that neutralize destabilizing social elements, which would mean neutralizing antisocial people, dissidents, and that's what the FEMA camps are for, folks. This would be essential for social control. Don't mind my cat, he's a pain in the butt. Let's see. Also a credible motivational surrogate for war that could ensure social cohesiveness, which would be the basic way to adapt to human drives to what the society needs, and that's right out of paragraph 1. One possible solution to control, quote, potential enemies of society, paragraph 6, would be to reintroduce slavery. They asserted that the, quote, traditional association of slavery should not blind us to, quote, its adaptability to advanced forms of social organization. They acknowledge that the Western moral and ethical values do not line up with slavery. Well, no doubt. Okay. But it is possible to develop a, quote, sophisticated of slavery. And that's what we got going on, folks. We're under slavery right now. We just don't know it because of the technology and the intelligence of the agencies that are behind all of this. Okay, it's the prison without the bars, folks. You know, and by understanding the truth of these things, we can start to shake our shackles off and identify who the real enemies are. They're not terrorists abroad. They're sitting right here in our power centers, you know, and we need to stop these people. and get things under control before it's too late. And we're committed to a nightmare future for forever and a day for future generations. So if you don't want to do it for yourself, that's fine, but do it for your children, do it for the next generation and thereon after. Okay, we need to stand together, or divided we're going to fall. Okay, this is no joke. These people are playing it for keeps. This is serious business. This isn't a game of any kind. This is real life, folks. Okay, these people are not jerking around, and they're passing legislation day and night to limit what we can do to stop them. And any opposition would label you as a enemy combatant, and they will lock your ass up under NDAA. Okay, I don't know how long I can talk about these things before I'm taken away as well. So I'll do what I can as long as I can, however I need to, because it's important that people speak out about these things. We cannot cower these people. This is our country, okay? Our forefathers bled and died. They sacrificed everything, People need to get up off the couch. Stop being fat and lazy and eating your GMOs and watching, the propaganda tube, the old pagan idol. I mean, that's what they used in pagan worship back in early Christianity. They would put their idols in their house, and they would center the room that it was in around that would be the centerpiece. Well, guess what the new centerpiece now is, folks? It's your television. Okay, turn it off, throw it out. You don't need it. Okay, read books, get smart. Stop getting spoon-fed your information. But anyway, I'm sorry. Let's get back to the report. Another possible solution to control potential enemies of society, like I said, would be to reintroduce slavery, and it don't line up with Western moral and economic values whatsoever. And we hear in our history books all the time about how the blacks were suppressed and slaves, and I mean there were white slaves in this country long before the blacks were brought here. Okay, and we'll get into that another time as well. Okay, so right now, everybody's under threat from this. Black, white, yellow, pink, doesn't matter. Okay, let's stop fighting amongst ourselves, pointing the fingers at ourselves. Let's unite together and turn our attention towards the real enemies behind the divide and conquer. Okay, stop acting like sheep. Your wits. Okay, as long as we act like cattle and sheep, that's how we're going to be treated.
All right. Now, in paragraph 7, they comment that the alternate enemy must imply a more immediate, tangible, and indirectly felt threat of destruction. This enemy must justify paying a blood price in the wide area of human concern. They go into paragraph 8 to say inconsiderable actual sacrifice of life. The construction of an up-to-date mythological or religious structure for this purpose would present difficulties in our era. Certainty to be considered. They go on to discuss the development of blood games. Okay, what new release have they come out with recently that's based on this, which would be the Hunger Games? Okay, so they're indoctrinating everybody with all this crap that they're putting out that people think is new. These are plans unfolding that have been long in the making, folks. Okay, you need to wise up. Anyway, with the blood games, to effectively control individual aggressive impulses, to be realistic, a ritual of this type might be socialized like the Spanish Inquisition and the witch trials of other periods. The purposes would be for social purification and state secrecy. State security. This type of thing is doubtful. It is, and this is their quote, considerable less fanciful than the wishful notion of many peace planners that a lasting condition of peace can be brought about without the most painstaking examination of every possible surrogate for the essential functions of war. They consider this, in a sense, the quest for William James' moral equivalent of war. Okay, so they're talking about gladiatorial games and the like, what they had back in ancient Rome, because
deep down, every man, when you're driving down the road and you see a car accident, immediately you're looking to see if anybody's hurt. But there's a lot of people that kind of like get off on the blood and the hurt people, and so these people know this. They know behavioral patterns, and they're going to exploit that. Okay, so don't lose yourself in the gladiatorial games, and while these people are planning and plotting behind your backs while you're distracted. And that's what all this mass entertainment is all about. Okay, if we're wasting time entertaining ourselves, we're not dealing with the problem that they're working behind the scenes. So again, if you act like a sheep, you'll be dealt with like a sheep. I'm not saying entertainment is bad, but it can't be the end all. You've got to break away from that from time to time, and get involved in life and what's happening, and will directly impact you. Now, on the ecological side of it, the function of war is a way to be very degrading to man. It starts off right in paragraph 1, where and this is their quote: "Man, like all other animals, man is brought down to the level of beasts."
They go on to comment that to forestall the inevitable historical cycles of inadequate food supply, post-Neolithic man destroys surplus members of his own species by organized warfare. And it gets better in paragraph 2, where man is compared in a limited degree with rats. This is because rats kill their own kind. Another one of the functions of war, they state, has served to help assure the survival of the human species. That's out of paragraph 3. They go on to say that in nature it is survival of the fittest, the inferior disappear. With war, this function is reserved because those who fight and die during wars are, in general, it's meaning man, biologically stronger members. In paragraph 6, they state, "Eventual methods of warfare will almost surely prove inadequate in the event to reduce the consuming population to a level consistent with survival of the species." Species, of course, meaning man. So controversial warfare, may not be able to kill enough people. So they go on to say in paragraph 7 that the second relevant factor is the efficiency of modern methods of mass destruction, even if their use is not to halt the regressive genetic effect of natural selection. And they have some interesting ideas for the substitutes, on their selective population control. Only interesting in a sense because of the scientific aspect of it. The moral sense is very degrading. They believe that coming up with substances for this function should be comparatively simple. Again, out of paragraph 1. They believe that even though war has not been genetically progressive, it can be fairly faulted as a system of gross population control to preserve the species. They believe that to have a universal requirement for procreation be limited to artificial insemination would be fully adequate substitute control for population levels. Contraception and embryonic growth would take place under laboratory conditions. And this type of reproductive system would have the advantage of being susceptible of direct eugenic management. And that to me sounds like, Brave New World by, Aldous Huxley, right out of the book. And when this report was written, steps to have control of some variant, of the ambiguous pill, through water supplies and, certain essential Foodstuffs, offset with a controlled antidote, of course, was already being developed of experimental biologists in Massachusetts, Michigan, California, Mexico, and the USSR. And this solution, they realize, cannot come without a substitute for war while there's still war going on. And the reason would be for excess population as war material.
That's stated in paragraph 5. As long as there is even a remote possibility of war, societies must maintain a supportable population, even if it affects the economy. Okay, so they hold these values far above anything else, folks. Okay, you and I do not matter in their little equation. Now to the cultural and scientific part of it. The function of war wouldn't make too much difference in the area of art. All they feel is that you change the depiction of the art, and change it from war scenario art to peaceful art, and that will condition the public subliminally that way, because they're exploiting our tribal warfare instincts with all the propaganda, and we don't even know it. If you do some research like on sports, that's a perfect example of tribal warfare exploitation. So if people are putting their energies, patriotic energies into rooting for that team, go Bears or go Cowboys, they're not being patriotic towards their country and being a dissident to their government. They're being a good little citizen, okay? And I guess that's what a man's supposed to do, according to them. I'm not a sports fan whatsoever. I don't waste my time with it. I do like other sporting activities. I like to fish and things like that. But anyway, this ain't about me. Let's see. Cultural and scientific. They exploit the exaltation of bravery, and the willingness to kill and risk death. Again, that's the exploitation of tribal warfare. And then concerning science, though, is quite a different story. What motivates the development of science on all levels? Their substitution for the function of war, for art to change. Like I had said previous, they need to just start painting in a different fashion. Now in science, substitution for the war would be to go into a giant research program, which we discussed already. And they have found if all war were to end tomorrow, the quest for scientific knowledge should go forward without slowing down for perhaps 2 decades or so.
That would be a good thing. We need to come together in universal enlightenment and quest for knowledge. Not to be manipulated and controlled and enslaved and possibly exterminated. I mean, that's not the future of humanity. I mean, these people. Okay, I can't prove it all yet, but I've got a pretty good hunch, though, that I'm getting close with some of my research as far as colonizing of other worlds and things like this. And in my opinion, these people have already done this. They're continuing to do it. They've been to the moon, not by the methods that were put forth in the space project, but by Illuminati technology, because they've built these things with the sacred geometry equations, and retrofitted these things. I'm not saying there's not aliens, but that's not all there is. A lot of this is their technology that is being used to foment this unseen enemy that will bring us into the New World Order. So we'll get more into that as well. There's just a lot of space phenomenon especially with Mars, with the face on Mars. There's been pyramids there. There's been pyramids on the moon. There's signs of terraforming on the surface of Mars. So don't discount all these things quite so easily. Okay, what you thought was bullshit before, you're coming to find out is actually reality. So don't knock it until you look into it. Okay, that's just your conditioning working. It's way around your mind that's been planted. Okay, start thinking for yourself. And then here's other aspects of the report that really don't have a category. What they're saying is, well, in section 5 I ended with some extra comments, and I'll kind of give you a summarize of that.
they consider war a general social release. It provides the release and redistribution of undifferentiated tensions. It's a type of therapy for humanity. It's a generational stabilizer, so that they can keep the population levels controlled. Those are just fancy words for population control. Of course, they don't control the elite's population. It's always the middle class and below's population. It's the poor man's blood being spilled for the rich man. And that's all it's ever been. And we need to change that. Okay. I don't know about y'all, but I'm sick of the few dominating the many. Okay. They're talking about equal balance and getting right and ending all these ecological problems and everything. Well, let's start with them. Okay. They're telling us that we're the problem. They're the problem because they, let's make them take their own medicine on this. Okay. I have no problem with, trying to go green and doing things by nature, and doing what I know in my heart is right by God. But these people, they're just imposing these decrees on us, and they're telling us that we're consuming too much. That if you don't sort your recyclables correctly, you can get a ticket and possibly go to jail. While they drive around in yachts the size of friggin' battleships and have 10 or 12 private jets, and but they're telling us we're consuming too much. Our carbon footprint's too big. Well, they can kiss my ass. Okay, that's double speak, folks. Okay. Let's see here. Anyway, with the generational stabilizer, it enables the deteriorating older generation to maintain control of the younger generation and destroying it if necessary. And that's what we're seeing going on today. Okay, it's the old mummies trying to control the young people. My PDF file is messing up on me. I don't know, I made some editing glitches in it or something. Bear with me, folks.
Okay, well, here's some substitutes for the functions of war model. They came up with an order to replace some of the functions of war. The economic function can be replaced with an in-depth social welfare program. Okay, and that's what's going on now as well. As of the census of last year, there was over 46 million people on food stamps. Okay, that's astounding. That's a record. I'm not sure what the figures were previous to that, but that's nuts. They tell you there's like 23% unemployment rate on the television, but in actuality, if you dig and do the research yourself, that's somewhere around 40 to 50%, and it's going to continue. Okay, so it's a compounding problem. As the economy dives and goes down further and our standard of living is lowered, the crime rates are going to go up, which is going to create the need for more internal police forces, more oppressive laws. So eventually everything that you do is going to be a crime, and the corporate prison system, they're going to be making a pile of money because they're right in bed with government. And we're under corporate fascism. Let's put it where it's at. And this has all been brought about intentionally. Okay. So the political function of it, it can be omnipresent, and virtually omnipotent. An internal police force, which we discussed before. These are the UN peacekeepers. Because a lot of our laws are being rewritten to serve the UN model. That they just don't come out and tell you that. They're hidden under regionalism. But if you look into Agenda 21 and take a serious research approach to that, it'll explain itself. It's no longer a conspiracy. It's a conspiracy fact. The publication's out there. And I've got it. Just request me, and I'll email you a copy. And then the sociological function that they control
they call the control function, can be programs derived from using the Peace Corps as a model. Slavery in a modern sophisticated form is another option. A motivational function to get back control can be intensified environmental pollution. And that's what the global warming and climate change and the weather modification programs, they've been changing our climate for a long time, well before, people were talking about chemtrails and HAARP and all that stuff. Also making new religious or other mythologies, one world religion. Socially oriented blood games is another, which we discussed before. Since war isn't choosy on who dies, the ecological function can be a comprehensive program of applied eugenics. In layman's terms, race breeding, superior race. I mean, it's the same thing Hitler was doing, because these are the same people running the show. Okay, these aren't just coincidences, folks. Okay, the people that put him in power are still in power. The same people that put Mao, Lenin, Stalin, all the, Mussolini. It's the same people, folks. Okay, it's the same bloodlines. There's a good book out there by Fritz Springmeier, The 13 Bloodlines of the Illuminati is good. Any of the Masonic books by Mackey, Manly P. Hall, Clymer, A. Waite, even Albert Pike. That he's probably one of the more well-known ones. But there's a lot of good Masonic books out there to explain a lot of this stuff, folks. Okay, we know who these people are now. We need to really. I don't really even need to research anymore. I know what's going on. I know enough to know that these people are serious trouble and they need to be stopped. Okay, not enough to expose them. We need to get on with it. Okay, and their recommendations are being followed.
Like I said, it's all scripted. The report concluded in '66. And Kennedy was shot before he could explain what he was talking about at the University, of Columbia. And Johnson ordered the report sealed because, for obvious reasons, that no one except those that needed to know and would know the contents of the report. And that was what, 61? I mean, we're talking 40, 50 years ago. So, these plans are long in the making. And I also found it interesting that these experts, that they took out all the more issues of their evaluations, where man is brought down to the level of animals, like a herd of cattle. They need to do what was best for the greater good of the herd, and who would have to be slaughtered, and who would stay within the herd, who would have to get rid of the excess members of the herd, and and what the potential of the owner decided was best. The report made us pawns, and they can just do whatever they want with us. We have no say-so because we don't even know that these things are transpiring. They're having meetings and meetings and everywhere, but we never hear about them. We're not privy to that information. So it's time to get involved, folks. However we can. And then we got population control. Well, before we get into that, I just want to make one quick statement on something. And I think I might have stated it before, but I'll state it again. America is the key element in the New World Order agenda. If America falls, the New World Order will succeed. If America can thwart this, we can beat it for the rest of the world. So we need everybody behind us, on this, because if we can keep America reestablish the free society, then that will give us what we need, the tools that we need to face this thing down, okay, and get these people pulled from power and tried and suffer the consequences of their actions. I'll leave it at that. Anyway, with the population control,
since the legalizing of abortion, they've had over 37 million Americans murdered before they could even be born. That's all abortion is. It's a fancy word for murder. And the more Americans that have died in the conflicts in America have been involved with, altogether. There's more people that have been killed from abortion than in all the wars we've had.
And America has been conditioned that this is not murder, but it's choice. Folks, it's murder. For Desert Storm, our soldiers had to have shots to protect them from chemical warfare. I don't know how many of you remember that. But these germs were, for botulism and anthrax. And, since then, over 7,000 of those servicemen have died from this stuff. They called it, the Gulf War syndrome. No, because they injected them with poison, to make sure that they can keep those population numbers where they're supposed to be. Okay, they're cannon fodder. And these servicemen, a lot of them are waking up, but most of them are deployed overseas. They can't help us if they're over there. And they're dismantling the military here in the country through the legislation. So it's been going on quite a while. Euthanasia and the right to die with dignity is being pushed everywhere. So is the quality of life, that can be, they say, can be improved. Extermination camps are being built to do away with undesirables. Your FEMA camps. AIDS is a government-made disease that the spread is encouraged by our government. I put a post out linking paths for the creation and the cure for AIDS and how it spreads. The global peacekeepers of the United Nations, it has a military that goes around the world acting as peacekeepers when they're actually destabilizers. They commit far worse atrocities than the criminals or terrorists that they're trying to stop. Okay, that's a cover. That's all it is. It's just words. You got to look at the actions. Don't believe what they tell you. Check it out for yourself. They're members of the UN forces, come from all countries. These peacekeepers are also stationed in the United States in closed bases throughout the country. Some of these bases are opened. Foreign tanks and vehicles are coming and are here in America, and they're secretly being painted white, which is the UN color, in various military installations around the country. Okay, and I've posted stuff online and various different social networks that I belong to, showing, photographs of these vehicles that are here on our soil. There's land grabs happening all over. They're going to be deploying aerial drones for for surveillance. I mean, we're heading to a totalitarian socialist system. We need to resist this. This is not what America is supposed to be about, and life ain't going to be worth living if you're living in 1984. And for those of you who don't know that book, that was written by George Orwell, basically describing a world built on that model. And the U.S. is disarming their military and closing down bases all over the country. Our president can sign an executive order that will put the military under the command of the UN, and President Clinton, he's already done just that. You need to go ahead and try to Google PPD 25 and also PPD 60, and that's a more in-depth look into the Disarmament, Arms, and Control Acts that basically signs over command of our military right to the UN. And if you notice, like in Kosovo, Somalia, some of these other countries, before the whole big war on terror was unleashed, they were over there, and a lot of them weren't even wearing United States
patches. A lot of them were UN insignias. The tanks are being painted up, with our the soldiers over there are being put in a situation where they're being removed, their patriotism's being removed, because they're painting the tanks, they're anything that resembles their patriotism is being phased out. And you'll see a lot of this today as well. But also, this didn't start in '61. This was just the study. It actually started with the founding of the United Nations and the UN Charter. But under Eisenhower, the National Security Act, NSC 5802 in 1958, that kind of putting that out there for the disarmament of the American military and eventually people. And then this evolved into 75 Stat 631, or Public Law 87-297 under Kennedy in '61. And then they called this expert team together to do this study during that time. And then from there, it came under 22 USC 2551. Congressional statement of the purpose of it was the relations and intercourse, and that was a article put out by Bernadine Smith. Very good. And racism is being pushed all over the media and through the government. Should riots develop, as in the other countries, we will need the peacekeeping force to quell the riots here in the U.S. They're already ready, folks. The whole Occupy movement was set up by these people, through George Soros and different propaganda experts like him, so that they can justify busting out with these forces and locking us all up, and taking away all our rights, declaring martial law, all the rest of it. They're setting the police state up around us, cameras on every corner. They're deploying genetically modified insects, mosquitoes. They're doing it with fish. They're developing the small surveillance systems at the size of freaking hummingbirds. So this is all meant for us. This is a nightmare, and we need to face this thing. And as far as the extraterrestrial enemy, actually, before I get into that, I wanted to talk about the new religion a little bit real quick, on the New Age, where the only acceptable religion is, anything other than theirs is going to be eliminated. And, they hate Christians. Christianity's at the top of their list, and these people have infiltrated, every area of our lives, with this crap. They're promoting Satanism and other occult religions, and they're already having human sacrifices. That's what's going on at the Bohemian Grove. That's what's going on in the similar place over in Germany, and there's a couple other locations here in America that aren't highly as publicized as Bohemian Grove, but these things are going on. There's no doubt about it. And I expose this through my Freemason books that I have and documents and stuff, and that's really what my podcasts are leading up to. But I wanted to get this information out straight away to you. Getting into the extraterrestrial enemy. This, like I said, this was written back in '61. Even with all the UFO sightings that they've already been putting out, with alien abductions and more sightings, there's UFO clubs everywhere where people have seen aliens and been abducted, and they get together for conventions and everything, and that stuff's really being promoted, and it's being done for a purpose, because they are trying to create this external enemy. That's really what it's about. Am I saying aliens don't exist? I don't know. I can't prove it. But I do know that they are really pushing for
a supposed fake alien invasion of some sort, by allowing this to continue, because they control everything. They control every aspect of society. Okay, so they're not for it, they're against it. Okay, it's that simple. And like the series of Star Trek, we've had that going on for a very long time. And if you really pay attention to those, I used to be a pretty good fan of them until I figured out exactly what they were trying to imply. They were, pretty much imposing ideas into your head about enforced one world government and the space colonies and socialistic values and things like that. And throughout both the series and the movies, they promoted New Age philosophy as well. The New Age will be the only philosophy accepted by the New World Order. And these folks have all kinds of experience with various races on other planets. You can watch, Watchtower Secrets, Dirty Watchtower Secrets. There's Like Father, Like Son, George W. Bush and the Fake Alien Invasion. Look for that. Excuse me. Also, Star Wars has also conditioned people to believe in a galaxy far, far away. Okay. These reinforce extraterrestrial life on other planets. The two movies, V and V, The Final Battle, with a series and shows and invasions from other planets. The movie Alien also shows this. The world would have to unite against it. Should the movies and television programs come to life with a real enemy. Okay, and this War of the Worlds, by H.G. Wells, that was a mind control experiment, or a New World Order test run, if you will. That's what that was all about. Okay, so it's not just me. All this stuff's on record, folks. And I'm just trying to do a regular podcast here and trying to be as formal as possible. I'm a real person, so I've been talking for quite a while. So I'm a smoker, so I'm going to kind of smoke and go along with this, and I'm also drinking me an ice house. So I'm going to be doing those things as I talk, so I can try to get a little more relaxed and get into the material. Okay. So this will be one of the advantages of talking on a webcam instead of a standing podium in a controlled environment. Okay, now they have to find a credible global threat. Okay, in a time of war, most citizens uncomplainingly accept their low quality of life and remain, fiercely loyal to their leaders. If sustaining a substitute for war is to be bound, then it must be also elicit that same reason. Therefore, a new enemy must be found that threatens the entire world. If they want to have a new world order, they have to have a worldwide enemy. And the prospects of being overcome by that enemy must be just as terrifying as war itself. And the report goes on to point out that allegiance requires a cause requires an enemy. And this is obvious to the critical point that the enemy, defies the cause, must seem generally formidable, and roughly speaking, the presumed power of the enemy, sufficient to warrant an individual sense of allegiance to a society, must be proportionate to the size and complexity of the society. Okay, and today, of course, that power, has to be one of unprecedented magnitude and frightfulness. That's what the whole war on terror is. Let's scare the public. Let's have a new Pearl Harbor. Look up the PNAC document. The neocons spelled it all out in the PNAC document, which PNAC is Project for the New Century. You read that.
Look into a lot of his quotes and what he's been involved with. And we all know the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds, so there's so many people involved. And that's what a conspiracy is, where it's two or more people involved in something that would otherwise be deemed illegal. Okay, so it is a conspiracy, and it's fact. And they were also going to be attempting to try to use poverty as a global threat, but most people are already impoverished, so they kind of threw that one out the window. But the alien invasion from outer space was given very serious consideration. The report says that the experiments along with these lines have already been tried. Okay, and public reaction, however, was not simply predictable because the threat was not credible. So here's what the report had to say on it. Credibility, in fact, lies at the heart of the problem of developing a political substitute for war. This is where the space race proposals, in many ways so well suited as economic substitutes for war, fall short. The most ambitious and unrealistic space project itself cannot generate a believable external menace. It has been hotly argued that a menace would offer the last best hope of peace, etc., by uniting mankind against the danger of destruction by creatures from other planets or from outer space. Experiments have been proposed to test the credibility of an out-of-world invasion threat. It is possible that a few or more difficult to explain flying saucer incidents of recent years were in fact early experiments of this kind. If so, they could have hardly have had judged encouraging. This report was released in '66 with the idea of an alien presence seemed fetched to the average person. And the intelligent, intelligent forms may exist beyond our planet, and could be monitoring. Whether that belief is right or wrong, it's not really the issue here. The point is that, these aliens have been shown on network I'm gonna kill my cat. That a dramatic encounter with with these aliens on network television, even if it were to be entirely fabricated by high-tech companies, or laser light show, it could be used to stampede all nations into this world government, supposedly to defend the earth from invasion. Okay, now on the other hand, if aliens were perceived to have the peaceful intention, an alternate scenario would have to be formed, and they've already done that as well. Okay, these people have left no stone unturned because they're not stupid. Okay, they have the brightest minds on the earth working for them, whether it's through their choice or direct forcefulness. Okay, they've got them. But anyway, their peaceful scenario would be come in the form of world government to respect a unified human species, speaking with a single voice in some kind of galactic federation. Okay, either scenario would be far more today than in 1966. Okay, because of the technology. Okay, look up Project Bluebeam, which is the fog screen tech, so that they can broadcast holograms onto the plasmified background that they're creating with the chemtrails and the geoengineering and the heart manipulation with the frequencies. That's what that's part of. Chemtrails and HARP have, it's all multi-purpose, but that's just one of the purposes for Project Bluebeam, which is also part of the religious aspect, so that way, no matter what country you live in, they can basically broadcast that deity of that country's worship, to appear to be having that coming. And with the LRAD acoustic technology, with the sound cannons that they have now, they can actually digitally infuse the sound element directly into your own mind, so it sounds like your God is talking to you. So know your Bible well and know that this is not the way that the second coming is going to come about, but they're going to try to use that to deceive you. So be aware of it. Look into Project Bluebeam and understand that.
they're using the environmental one. We've already discussed that. They're creating as many fictitious enemies as possible, whatever it takes. You can look up Project Megiddo. It explains quite a bit about that. They're promotes labor. Basically anybody that's on welfare already is already a slave to the government, whether you realize it or not.
You're a slave to the state. They're working on legislation to have these people work for their benefits. Around 1966, or excuse me, 1996, these benefits, they're coming in the form of food stamps and the EBT cards, and they're trying to do this to stop welfare fraud and give the government more control over its welfare slaves. But there's already several labor camps built, which they've been passing laws to create civilian workforces and stuff. Look for those. They're in all the FEMA executive orders. They're on the Federal Register. Look them up. And a lot of these camps will be for strong prisoners who are considered dissidents. They're also going to be using these camps for genetic experimentation. And they're already doing it on aborted babies. And that was a bill signed by Clinton to support the fetal experiments, which is the stem cell research and all that. I mean, that's a cover for other horrendous things that they're doing. And a lot of people don't know about the biospheres that they've been building into the mountains. I'm aware of two of them, one in Washington State and one in North Carolina. And no one can have these places. They're surrounded, which is the biosphere is the UN term for colony. It's rumored that these colonies are being used for breeding of their superior race. Okay, and you can't even get close to these things. They also have these concentration camps built into storage facilities, built-in storage facilities, I should say, in these camps, and that is for storing the human organs that they will be extracting from people and selling on the black market. I'm still looking for evidence of this, but there's a lot of speculation out there that there has been guillotines purchased by our government and shipped throughout the country to these different camps, because that way they can organ harvest the deceased without having to, they don't want to inject you with a poison, they don't want to electrocute you. So I mean, all these things would ruin the body. So that would be a clean death for them in a cheap way. That way they can save the money on a bullet. But for some people, I guess that would be even stronger distance. They actually have microwaves built into these things that have the capacity to, these things are huge. I don't want to continue to try to talk about the things to scare you, but these things are kind of light, and a lot of them are being proven fact. But in closing, I suggest you get this book on the report. It goes in a lot more detail than what I have. The fact that a few men came up with this plan to bring a once free nation into fascism, it really pisses me off, and it should upset you too. They don't, and the fact that the majority of the American people don't even know that this is going on, and I mean, if our founding fathers were alive today, they'd be, I'm sure they got to be spinning in their graves over this, and we can't give up without a fight, for what they fought and died for. I mean, there's a quote by Jefferson, and I'm going to end it with this quote: "The tree of liberty, from time to time, has to be watered with the blood of patriots and tyrants alike." Okay, my next podcast we'll get back into the mystery religions on Babylon, but I just thought this was pretty important to get out there. It's I'm not a professional at this. I'm just trying to convey the information the best I can in the comfort of my home, and hopefully you'll use this information well, and
continue to do your research on it and information along. Have a good night, and I'll see you on the next podcast. God bless you.